A simple waitress found a ring, but when she found out whose it changed her life. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint hum of conversation filled the cozy little cafe on Main Street. It wasn't much, but for Ella Hayes, it was home. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, she slipped on her faded apron, tied her chestnut hair into a quick ponytail, and greeted the world with a smile. At 22 years old, Ella's life was a patchwork of sacrifices. College had been a dream she'd once entertained, but it was buried under the weight of overdue rent and the relentless struggle to make ends meet. The cafe job wasn't glamorous, but it kept her afloat. "Ella, Table 3's coffee is getting cold," barked her boss, Clara, from the counter. "Got it," Ella called back, grabbing the tray and weaving through the crowded cafe with practiced ease. Despite the chaos of her daily grind, Ella had a warmth about her that drew people in. Regulars adored her, tourists left glowing reviews, and even Clara, who had a bark worse than her bite, secretly admired her work ethic. But when the cafe emptied and the bustle quieted, Ella often found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. Dreams of culinary school and her very own bakery danced just out of reach, like the aroma of a pie cooling on a windowsill, tantalizing but unattainable. One crisp autumn afternoon, the cafe was livelier than usual. The small bell above the door jingled incessantly as streams of people came and went. Ella noticed the change in atmosphere as soon as she clocked in. "What's going on today?" she asked Clara, who was unusually flustered. "There's a big wedding this weekend," Clara replied, nodding toward the large party occupying the back corner. "Apparently, the bride's family is loaded. They're staying at the Beaumont estate, and they've got half the town running errands for them." Ella glanced at the group, a dozen or so people dressed in casual but expensive clothing, their laughter loud and carefree. In the center of it all was a young woman, her face glowing with excitement as she chatted animatedly with a man who appeared to be her fiancé. "That's the bride-to-be," Clara whispered, noticing Ella's curiosity. "Her name's Lily Beaumont. Sweet girl, from what I hear. Her father, though, a real big shot, owns half the properties in the county." Ella nodded absently, her attention drawn to the way Lily's eyes sparkled as she spoke. There was a warmth to her, a kind of joy Ella couldn't help but envy. As the day wore on, the cafe grew quieter, and Ella found herself serving Lily's table. "Excuse me," Lily said with a smile as Ella refilled her coffee. "Are you from around here?" "Yes," Ella replied, setting the pot down. "I've lived here my whole life." "It's such a lovely town," Lily said, glancing out the window. "Perfect for a wedding." Ella's lips twitched into a smile. "Congratulations, by the way. Weddings are such a special time." "Thank you," Lily said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I'm so excited, but I won't lie. It's been stressful, too. There are a million little details to manage." "I can imagine," Ella said, her voice soft. "Do you have any big dreams, Ella?" Lily asked suddenly, her tone genuine. The question caught Ella off guard. She hesitated before replying, "I'd love to open my own bakery someday." Lily's face lit up. "That's amazing. You absolutely should." Ella laughed lightly, but there was a wistfulness in her eyes. Maybe one day. By the time the cafe closed that evening, Ella couldn't stop thinking about her brief conversation with Lily. Despite their vastly different circumstances, there had been something sincere about the bride-to-be that resonated with Ella. As she swept the floors and stacked the chairs, she let herself imagine what it might be like to wear a wedding gown, to have family and friends gathered around, to have dreams within reach instead of always on hold. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a golden glow over the cafe's windows. In the distance, the Beaumont estate loomed, its grandeur a stark contrast to Ella's modest world. She sighed, shaking off the thought. Tomorrow would bring another busy day, and there was no time for daydreams. The cafe was already bustling when Ella arrived the next morning, the chatter of early customers filling the air. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and pastries was comforting, but the tension was palpable. "Busy again today?" Ella asked Clara as she tied her apron. "More wedding prep," Clara replied, gesturing toward a group seated at the corner table. Ella recognized Lily Beaumont immediately, but today the bride-to-be's cheerful demeanor was gone. Her face was pale, her hands fidgeting nervously as she whispered to her fiancé and a few others at the table. Ella carried on with her tasks, but she couldn't help glancing over occasionally. Something was clearly wrong. "Ella," Clara said quietly, nudging her. "Table 7 looks like they could use some help. Check on them when you get a minute." Nodding, Ella approached the group. "Good morning," she said with a polite smile. "Can I get you anything?" Lily looked up, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. "No, thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "Are you sure?" Ella asked, her concern growing. Lily hesitated before blurting out, "I've lost my wedding ring." The table fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Ella's breath hitched as she took in Lily's panicked expression. "It was my grandmother's," Lily continued, her voice breaking. "I was wearing it earlier, but now it's gone, and I don't know where I could have dropped it." Ella crouched slightly, meeting Lily's gaze. "When was the last time you remember having it?" "This morning," Lily said, her hands trembling. "I'm sure I had it here at the cafe. I must have dropped it somewhere." Ella straightened, her mind racing. "I'll help you look for it," she said firmly. "You don't have to do that," Lily said, though her voice was tinged with desperation. "It's no trouble," Ella replied. "I'll start checking the floor in the areas you've been. Don't worry, we'll find it." Ella searched the cafe meticulously, scanning every corner for any sign of the missing ring. She checked under tables, between chair cushions, and along the edges of the floorboards. Customers noticed her diligence and even joined in, asking what they could do to help. "Anything yet?" Clara asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Ella shook her head. "Not yet, but I'll keep looking." Stepping outside, Ella decided to search the pavement near the entrance, where Lily had been earlier that morning. Her eyes scanned every crack and crevice, but still, there was no sign of the ring. Just as she was about to give up, something shiny caught her eye near the edge of the curb. She crouched down, brushing away some fallen leaves, and there it was. A delicate gold band with a small diamond that sparkled even in the dim morning light. Her heart leapt. Ella rushed back into the cafe, clutching the ring tightly in her hand. "Lily!" she called out, her voice cutting through the chatter. Lily turned, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Is this what you're looking for?" Ella asked, holding out the ring. Lily's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Oh my God!" she whispered, taking the ring from Ella's palm. "Yes, that's it. That's my grandmother's ring." The group at the table erupted into cheers, and Lily threw her arms around Ella, pulling her into a tight hug. "You have no idea what this means to me," Lily said, her voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Ella smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm just glad I could help." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind. Word of Ella's kindness spread quickly, and customers kept stopping to thank her or offer praise. But for Ella, the real reward was the look of relief on Lily's face. Later that afternoon, as the cafe quieted, Lily approached Ella once more. "Ella," she said softly, "you didn't have to go to so much trouble for me. But you did, and I'll never forget it." Ella waved a hand dismissively. "Really, it was nothing. Anyone would have done the same." Lily shook her head. "Not everyone would have cared enough to search like that. I'll make sure you're properly thanked." Ella laughed lightly. "You've already thanked me. That's more than enough." But as Lily left the cafe with her fiancé, Ella had no idea just how much her small act of kindness would change her life. The following morning, Ella arrived at the cafe as usual, expecting another busy day filled with coffee orders and hurried conversations. What she didn't expect was to see a sleek black car parked outside and a sharply dressed man waiting just inside the cafe, his presence commanding attention. Clara approached Ella as soon as she walked through the door, her eyes wide. "That man over there," she whispered, nodding toward the stranger. "He's been waiting for you. Said his name is Mr. Beaumont." Ella froze. Beaumont. The name sounded familiar, and then it hit her. Lily's family. Straightening her apron, Ella approached the man cautiously. He was tall, with graying hair and a polished demeanor that screamed wealth and authority. Despite his intimidating aura, his smile was warm. "Miss Hayes, I presume?" he said, his voice smooth. "Yes, sir," Ella replied, her tone polite but uncertain. "I'm Edward Beaumont," he said, extending a hand. "Lily's father." Ella shook his hand, her mind racing. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Beaumont. Is everything all right?" His smile widened. "Better than all right, thanks to you. My daughter told me about how you found her wedding ring. She was in tears when she recounted how kind and thorough you were." Ella's cheeks flushed. "I'm glad I could help. It was just a matter of being in the right place at the right time." "Modesty is admirable, but I don't think you fully understand what you did for her," Edward said, his tone serious now. "That ring belonged to her grandmother, my mother. It's been in our family for generations. Losing it would have devastated her, especially so close to her wedding." "I'm just happy she has it back," Ella said sincerely. Edward nodded, studying her for a moment. "Lily told me about your conversation. About your dream of opening a bakery?" Ella's stomach tightened. "Oh, that was just small talk. It's not something I could actually afford to do." "Why not?" Edward asked, his tone probing but not unkind. Ella hesitated. "Between rent, bills, and taking care of my responsibilities, it's hard to save for something like that. Maybe one day, but not anytime soon." Edward's expression softened, and he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small envelope. "Miss Hayes," he said, handing it to her, "consider this my thank you for what you did for my daughter." Ella frowned, taking the envelope cautiously. "What is this?" "Open it," Edward encouraged. With trembling hands, Ella opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a check made out to her name for an amount that made her knees weak. $25,000. "Mr. Beaumont, I can't accept this," Ella said, her voice shaking. "Yes, you can," he replied firmly, "and you will. This is only the beginning. I want to do more than just thank you. I want to help you achieve your dream." Ella stared at him, stunned. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Edward said with a smile. Later that day, Ella sat in the back room of the cafe, staring at the check in disbelief. She had never seen so much money in her life, let alone held it in her hands. Clara poked her head in, her face full of curiosity. "So, what did Mr. Beaumont want?" Ella handed her the check without a word. Clara's jaw dropped. "Is this real?" Ella nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wants to help me start my bakery." Clara sank into the chair across from her. "Ella, do you realize what this means? You can finally do it. You can make your dream come true." "It doesn't feel real," Ella said, tears brimming in her eyes. "Well, it is real," Clara said firmly. "And you deserve it." Over the next few weeks, Ella met with Edward several times to discuss her plans. He connected her with his financial advisors and offered to cover the additional costs of leasing a small space, renovating it, and purchasing equipment. "You'll repay me in one way," Edward said during one of their meetings. Ella looked at him nervously. "How?" "By being successful," he replied with a grin. "Show the world what you're capable of." One evening, as Ella sat at home poring over floor plans for the bakery, her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Hi, Ella. Just wanted to let you know the wedding went perfectly. Thank you again for everything. My dad says your bakery plans are moving along nicely. So excited for you. Let me know if you need anything. Ella sonrió, su corazón lleno." She replied quickly, thanking Lily for her support. But just as she set her phone down, it buzzed again. This time the message wasn't from Lily, it was from Clara. "Ella, we need to talk ASAP. Something's happened." Ella arrived at the cafe early the next morning, her heart pounding as she replayed Clara's cryptic text in her mind. The cafe was quiet, the early sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. Clara was waiting for her in the back room, pacing nervously. "Clara, what's going on?" Ella asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Clara stopped pacing and looked at her with a mixture of worry and regret. "Ella, I didn't want to scare you, but you need to know. There's been a problem with the property you were planning to lease for the bakery." Ella's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "It was sold," Clara said. "Out from under you. Apparently, another buyer swooped in last minute and offered more money. I found out this morning when I ran into the landlord." Ella's legs felt weak and she sank into a chair. "Sold? But Edward and I were already negotiating the lease. How is that even possible?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know, but from what I hear, the buyer has connections. Someone with influence." The news hit Ella like a punch to the gut. The property had been perfect, an affordable space in a prime location. Losing it felt like losing the first real chance she'd ever had to make her dream come true. Later that day, Ella sat at the counter of the cafe, staring at her phone as she debated whether to call Edward. He had already done so much for her. The thought of asking for more felt selfish. But before she could make a decision, the bell above the door jingled, and Edward himself walked in. He approached her with his usual air of confidence, but his expression darkened as soon as he saw her face. "Ella, what's wrong?" he asked, sitting down across from her. She hesitated before explaining what Clara had told her. Edward listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "I'll look into it," he said firmly when she finished. "Edward, you've already done so much," Ella said. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Edward replied. "This is just a setback. We'll figure it out." True to his word, Edward began making calls that afternoon, using his network to investigate what had happened. By the next morning, he had an answer, and it wasn't good. The property was bought by a development firm, Edward told Ella during their meeting. "They're planning to tear it down and build luxury apartments." Ella's heart sank. "So there's no way to get it back?" Edward shook his head. "Not unless we want to pay triple the original price. And even then, they'd probably refuse. These firms don't back down easily." Ella slumped in her chair, defeated. "It feels like every time I take a step forward, something pulls me back." Edward reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on hers. That's life, Ella. But setbacks don't mean failure. You just have to keep going. Over the next week, Ella and Edward worked tirelessly to find a new location. They toured several properties, but none of them felt right. Either they were too expensive, too far from town, or lacked the charm Ella wanted for her bakery. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Edward received a call from one of his business contacts. "There's a property on the edge of town," he told Ella excitedly. "It's an old bakery that's been closed for years. It needs work, but it could be perfect." Ella's eyes lit up. "Let's see it." The next day, Edward and Ella drove to the property. The building was small and unassuming, with faded signage and a cracked sidewalk out front. But as Ella stepped inside, she felt a spark of hope. The interior was worn but charming, with vintage tile floors and a large open space that could easily be transformed into a cozy bakery. "It's perfect," Ella said, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward smiled. "Then, let's make it yours." Back at the cafe, Clara was thrilled to hear the news. "See? I told you everything would work out," she said, hugging Ella tightly. "I hope so," Ella replied, her excitement tempered by the challenges ahead. "Hope has nothing to do with it," Clara said with a grin. "It's hard work and determination, and you've got both." As Ella began planning the renovations for the new property, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had intentionally tried to sabotage her. The sudden sale of the first location and the involvement of a powerful development firm didn't seem like a coincidence. Her suspicions were confirmed a few days later when Clara overheard a conversation at the cafe. "Ella," Clara said, pulling her aside, "you're not going to believe this. I just heard that the firm that bought the first property, they're connected to someone named Thomas Marlowe." Ella frowned. "Who's Thomas Marlowe?" Clara hesitated. "He's Lily's ex-fiancé. They broke up a few years ago, and from what I hear, it wasn't exactly amicable. He's been holding a grudge against the Beaumont family ever since." Ella's blood ran cold. "You think he did this to spite them?" Clara nodded. "It makes sense, doesn't it? He probably found out about Edward helping you and wanted to cause trouble." Ella shared the revelation with Edward, who was furious, but not surprised. "Thomas has always been vindictive," Edward said. "But he won't stop us. Let him play his games. We'll win in the end." With renewed determination, Ella threw herself into the renovations for the new bakery. Every setback, every challenge, only made her more determined to succeed. And as the weeks went by, the dream she had once thought impossible began to take shape. The air outside the small bakery was filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread, cinnamon rolls, and Ella's signature berry tarts. The shop was still unfinished, with construction dust lingering in some corners and workers adding final touches. But Ella's dream was coming to life. Inside, she stood behind the counter, running her hands over the smooth wood surface. The cafe-style bakery was warm and inviting, with a cozy seating area, pastel-colored walls, and vintage light fixtures that gave the space a nostalgic charm. Edward walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. "How's it coming along?" he asked, setting a cup in front of Ella. "Better than I could have imagined," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "The sign goes up tomorrow, and then we're ready for the grand opening." Edward beamed. "You've done incredible work, Ella. Your perseverance is something to admire." "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her gratitude clear. Edward waved her off. "You had this in you all along. I just gave you a little nudge." The grand opening of Ella's bakery, Ella's Hearth, was a whirlwind of joy and nerves. Friends, family, and locals gathered to celebrate, filling the small shop with laughter and excitement. Clara was there, fussing over every detail, while Edward stood proudly near the entrance, greeting guests. Lily arrived with her new husband, carrying a bouquet of flowers for Ella. "I'm so proud of you," she exclaimed, hugging her tightly. Ella grinned. "Thank you. This wouldn't have happened without your dad." Lily laughed. "Well, he wouldn't have done it if you hadn't saved my ring and my sanity." As the crowd thinned, Ella finally had a moment to breathe. She stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron, when the door chimed softly. A man stepped in, his tailored suit and confident demeanor immediately catching her attention. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice smooth and unfamiliar. "Yes?" Ella replied, feeling a flicker of unease. "I'm Thomas Marlowe," he said, extending a hand. Ella's heart skipped a beat. This was the man who had tried to sabotage her dream, the ex-fiancé of Lily Beaumont and the one responsible for buying out her first property. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone cautious but firm. Thomas smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "I came to see the bakery. I've heard quite a lot about it. And about you." Ella frowned, unsure of his motives. "I'm not sure what you're doing here, Mr. Marlowe, but if this is about what happened with the property—" Thomas held up a hand. "Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. In fact, I wanted to apologize." Ella blinked, taken aback. "I let my grudge against Edward get the better of me," Thomas admitted. "When I heard he was helping you, I saw an opportunity to complicate things for him. But seeing this place now, and hearing about how hard you've worked to make it happen, I realize I was wrong." Ella crossed her arms, her skepticism evident. "And why should I believe you?" Thomas chuckled softly. "You shouldn't. But I'd like to make it up to you. I own a chain of coffee shops, and I think your bakery could supply us with pastries. It would be a profitable partnership for both of us." Ella stared at him, her mind racing. The offer was tempting. Thomas's coffee chain was well known, and the exposure could bring in steady income. But could she trust him? Ella sought Edward's advice later that evening. "You should consider it," Edward said after she explained the situation. "Seriously?" Ella asked, surprised. Edward nodded. "I know Thomas. He's manipulative, yes, but he's also a businessman. If he's offering you a deal, it's because he sees potential in what you've built. And as much as I dislike him, I think you could benefit from the partnership." Ella sighed. "What if it's a trap?" "Then you walk away," Edward said simply. "But don't let fear hold you back. You've worked too hard for that." After much deliberation, Ella decided to meet with Thomas again. This time, their conversation was professional and straightforward. Thomas presented a fair contract, and after careful review, Ella agreed to the partnership. The deal proved to be a turning point for Ella's hearth. The bakery's reputation grew rapidly, and customers flocked to the shop to try the pastries that had become the talk of the town. Thomas, true to his word, honored the agreement without issue. While Ella remained cautious, she began to see him less as an adversary and more as a valuable connection. As the weeks turned into months, Ella's life transformed. The bakery thrived, her relationship with Edward and Lily deepened, and she even found herself mentoring other young women with dreams of their own. One evening, as Ella closed up the shop, Edward stopped by with a bottle of champagne. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To second chances," Ella replied, clinking her glass against his. Months turned into a year, and Ella's hearth had become more than just a bakery. It was a cornerstone of the community. The little shop that started with Edward Beaumont's generosity and Ella's determination was now a bustling hub, where locals gathered for coffee, pastries, and conversation. Ella stood behind the counter one sunny morning, watching customers filter in and out. Families sat at tables, children giggled over frosted cookies, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It was everything she'd dreamed of, and more. Clara entered through the back door, carrying a stack of boxes. "Big delivery today," she said, setting them on the counter. Ella grinned. "We've got a few special orders for the weekend. Seems like everyone wants our cinnamon rolls for their brunch parties." Clara chuckled. "Well, you've earned it. You've turned this place into something incredible." Ella's smile softened. "We've all earned it. This bakery isn't just mine. It's everyone's. It's built on the kindness and support of people like Edward, Lily, and even you." Clara waved her off with a laugh. "Oh, stop. You're going to make me cry." That evening, Ella closed the shop early to host a special event. It was a mentorship program she'd started a few months prior, offering free workshops to young women interested in starting their own businesses. The back room was filled with eager faces as Ella shared her story, from her humble beginnings at the cafe to the challenges and triumphs of running Ella's Hearth. "One act of kindness changed my life," she told the group. "It reminded me that no dream is too big if you're willing to work for it and accept help along the way. And now, it's my turn to pay it forward." After the workshop, a young woman named Maria approached Ella hesitantly. "Miss Hayes," she said, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Do you really think someone like me could do what you've done?" Ella placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Maria, someone once believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Let me be that person for you." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and Ella felt a familiar warmth in her chest. As the anniversary of Ella's Hearth approached, Lily and Edward insisted on hosting a celebration at the bakery. The event was small but heartfelt, with family, friends, and loyal customers gathering to toast Ella's success. Lily beamed as she presented a small plaque to Ella. "To the woman who not only found my ring, but also found a way to inspire us all," she said. Edward stepped forward, raising his glass. "Ella, you've done more than build a bakery. You've built a community, and I couldn't be prouder to have been part of your journey." Ella accepted the plaque with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "But this isn't just my success, it's ours. This bakery stands because of the kindness, trust, and belief that you all showed me. I promise to keep paying it forward, just like you did for me." As the celebration wound down, Ella found a quiet moment to herself. She stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The lights of the bakery glowed warmly behind her, a beacon of hope and possibility. Edward joined her, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. "What's next for Ella's Hearth?" he asked. Ella smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Expansion, maybe. More workshops. And who knows? Maybe one day I'll start a foundation to help other aspiring bakers and entrepreneurs." Edward chuckled. "I have no doubt you'll make it happen." Ella turned to him, her smile unwavering. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you, Edward. Thank you for believing in me." He patted her shoulder affectionately. "The best investments are the ones that grow beyond measure. And you, Ella, are my best investment yet." As the night wore on, Ella returned to the bakery, closing up for the evening. She stood in the quiet space, her heart full of gratitude. Arthur's journal sat on a shelf behind the counter, its well-worn pages a constant reminder of her journey. On the inside cover, she had written a simple inscription: "One act of kindness can change everything." Ella ran her fingers over the words, a smile spreading across her face. The journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, dreams to chase, and lives to touch. But Ella knew one thing for certain. The kindness she had received would ripple outward, touching more lives than she could ever imagine. Months after the anniversary celebration of Ella's hearth, life at the bakery had settled into a joyful routine. The bakery had become a cherished part of the town, a place where memories were made, friendships were forged, and dreams were nurtured. One crisp autumn morning, Ella arrived early, unlocking the door and stepping inside the warm, familiar space. As she set the ovens to preheat and started measuring ingredients, her mind wandered to everything that had brought her here. The people, the challenges, the unexpected moments of kindness, they had all shaped her journey. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the bell above the door. She turned to see Maria, the young woman who had attended one of Ella's workshops months ago, standing nervously in the doorway. "Maria!" "What a surprise," Ella said, wiping her hands on her apron and walking over. Maria held up a small white box tied with a ribbon. "I wanted to show you something," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Ella opened the box to reveal a perfectly frosted cupcake, topped with delicate swirls of icing and a tiny edible flower. "Maria, this is beautiful," Ella said, her eyes lighting up. "Did you make this?" Maria nodded, beaming. "I took what I learned in your workshop and started experimenting at home. I'm saving up to open my own shop someday, but for now, I've been selling these at the local farmers market." Ella's heart swelled with pride. "You're doing it, Maria. You're making your dream happen." "I never would have started if it wasn't for you," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Ella hugged her tightly. "It's all you, Maria. I just gave you a nudge." Later that day, as the bakery bustled with customers, Ella spotted Edward sitting in his usual spot near the window. He was reading the newspaper, a contented smile on his face. She brought over a cup of his favorite coffee and slid into the chair across from him. "You've been quiet today," she said teasingly. Edward chuckled. "Just enjoying the view. This place feels like magic, doesn't it?" Ella smiled. "It's more than I ever dreamed it could be." Edward set down his paper and leaned forward. "You know, Ella, this bakery is more than just a business. It's a symbol. People see what you've done here, and it inspires them. It's like a ripple. Your kindness and hard work are spreading further than you realize." Ella tilted her head thoughtfully. "You think so?" "I know so," Edward said firmly. "Take Maria, for example. She's proof of what happens when someone sees a light in the darkness. That light spreads." That evening, after the last customer had left, Ella locked up the bakery and took a moment to reflect. Edward's words stayed with her as she tidied up the space. She thought about Lily's wedding ring, a seemingly small moment that had set everything in motion. She thought about Maria's cupcake, a tangible result of a dream in progress. And she thought about the countless faces that had passed through her bakery, each touched in some way by what she had built. Ella pulled out a small notebook she kept behind the counter, where she jotted down ideas and dreams for the future. On a blank page, she wrote, "Kindness creates ripples. Let's make waves." Closing the notebook, Ella felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone she had touched, and everyone who had touched her in return. And as she stepped outside into the crisp night air, the lights of Ella's hearth glowing softly behind her, she smiled. The ripples had only just begun. What do you think of Ella's continued journey of kindness and inspiration? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore more stories of resilience, transformation, and the extraordinary power of small acts of kindness. Thank you for reading. See you in the next heartwarming tale.